Does anybody have any questions? We have a roving mic, so that you can just put your hand up and the mic will come to you, so we'll be able to hear.
Hey, David from Kevston here. So I work with a lot of entrepreneurs who either are serial entrepreneurs or the first-time entrepreneurs, or all those kind of things. And those are the kind of people you would think naturally have a lot of resilience. And then, as I actually have been to quite a few talks about resilience, I'm really interested in it. Still don't understand it. You did shed a lot of light on it. And the reason I don't understand it is because no one can really put a finger on it. So, in my understanding, resilience is something that allows you to deal with the situation. But when you talk about things like confidence and things like being happy with yourself, spending time with yourself, all of those people have either none of it or some of it, and they're super inconfident, but they still deal with the situation. And I was just wondering whether you have something to add to that. So can you lack all of those things that people say resilience should bring and still be resilient? And if that's the case, can you be resilient and actually be in complete pain consistently through going with it? And the kind of satisfaction only comes at the end of it. And then only then you can say, okay, I think I've been resilient through that.
Okay. Just grasp a couple of things there. There is no single silver bullet to resilience. Yeah, one size doesn't fit all. And what works for me might be completely different what works for you. So what it is about taking a toolkit and working out the things that you need to kind of put into it. And also, every situation that you experience is going to need different tools, if you like, to apply to fix that. So it's about creating a toolkit. But I think it's very important when you're observing how other people respond. Remember, when you see other people, you are only docking on to a part of them. Some people might give the impression that they absolutely sail through things, but underneath, there might be a swan on the surface, but they're, flapping away underneath. So you don't always get the total picture. I don't know whether that's answered your question. In terms of the overall encompassing definition of resilience, it is about the ability to be able to bounce back from adversity. Resilience comes from the Latin word resilio, which literally translates into to jump back. So, being able to go through these situations in the best possible way that you can.
That's useful, thank you.
I can just add a slight bit to that, especially when you're looking around entrepreneurship. It's also going down a layer underneath the entrepreneur, and it's about their reason and goals for being an entrepreneur. Being a visionary entrepreneur is very different driver, and obviously I think clearly has more resilience because it has lots more of the other 10 points than sometimes understanding somebody who wants to be famous or wants to be successful is. What is that driver that is driving the entrepreneur? Because this route here has higher degrees of failure. If I set my expectations so high, but the root cause is very different. It's about that openness that we talk about, that willingness to fail. True entrepreneurs that I believe that are resilient look at, say, from top leaders, have closed down 2 or 3 businesses before they ever were successful. That's resilience. But if I'm driven by maybe family or by a stronger force that's external to me, then failure is deemed by the world around me, and therefore it's a judgment. Does that make a little, yeah? And I think that's truly understanding and really interviewing entrepreneurs. Why do you want to be an entrepreneur? What are the driving forces, and what are the external and internal forces that is propelling you forward? Yeah, because it's all about failure. Failure to a lot of entrepreneurs is just one more step of getting it right next time.
I think if you took the word resilience and you actually, bridged it over to the word recovery, we're all going to get pushed back, we're all going to get knocked down, we're all invariably going to experience things in our lives, but it's about the ability to be able to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and carry on, with a clear focus.
And see the perspective of what failure is. Failure is just an opportunity to do it right the next time, or to not do it that way again. I think there's a very famous, a very interesting story about KFC when he was trying to sell his recipe. And it's something like 700 or 800 times he knocked on people's doors to sell his recipe. And it was just, well, that's one less door I knock on next time. And that's resilience. If you have a belief, then that's the driving force. And that's an internal belief as opposed to external people pushing you into an environment maybe you're not comfortable with.
Oh yeah, my name's Hassan, I'm from the BBC. One of the things that I struggle with is, my personal life I'm not so bad, but as I spend a lot of time at work, I find that impacts what I'm doing outside of work. And I think where I struggle is where trying to be, focused and positive and seeing the good and make the most of a bad situation, whatever it may be, is great until you come across people who have control and influence and make decisions that affect you, and you have zero control over that. And that is when I tend to struggle to keep that going, particularly if it's going on for a long time. So any thoughts on that?
It's quite interesting actually, because we're all little control freaks at heart, yeah? If we can, we like to be in control of things. But I think the landscape of life, particularly the workplace, less and less we're in control. There is so much change, and very often things are put upon us. That it's almost kind of like a grief experience that we have, because if your landscape and your comfort zone is a certain way, and then somebody comes along and says you don't have any decision in this, you don't have any influence about this, but we're going to change things. Very often we can react in a way that is almost akin to grief, because we're kind of losing something. And there was an interesting book that was written in the 1920s by a Swiss-American psychologist called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And this book was called On Death and Dying. And the idea was that when you experience grief or change that you don't like, because it amounts to the same for us psychologically, that we kind of go through a grief cycle. Because first of all, we're quite shocked, and then we'll almost kind of deny it, because hang on, this is my reality, that's not. And then we might get quite angry about that, and because we get angry, what goes up might come down, we might get depressed, we might bargain, and then eventually we get to that point of acceptance. And I think what we need to do is really work on conditioning our minds to say there are some things in our life that we won't have any control over. Yeah? It could be job loss, it could be relationship breakdowns, it could be illness. And what we need to do is to acknowledge and accept that psychologically we'll go through certain emotions, but we need to get to that point of acceptance. Because can you imagine if you held your life in your hand, but you held it like this, and it was like sand in your hand, it would actually run through your fingers. But if you actually held it with an open palm, relaxed, and with acceptance, that's actually quite a powerful position to be in. I'm not saying it's easy, but if we can actually help ourselves and condition ourselves to get to that point of acceptance, from a resilient point of view, it empowers us to be stronger, to be able to deal with the current situation that perhaps we don't like. Does that sort of help?
It does,
yeah. And do have a look on the library, because on the library there are lots of tools and support kits about helping people to be able to deal with change, particularly change that they don't particularly like, or they certainly haven't invited.
One of the things that sort of comes out of what you said earlier is goals and where you want to get to this. And I think particularly from people from a work point of view, you want to be here, you see an opportunity, you want to go for it, and then somebody else has to say whether you can actually pursue that or not. I think that for a lot of people, myself, might be different situation.
And I think something you really have to begin to learn to focus on is do listen to the internal dialogue. If that is the reality, you create your own perspective on that reality. If it's not going to change, and our self-dialogue is, oh, it's been thrust upon me, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. Just think the way you would behave when you feel like it. You walk like this, and you begrudge everything around you. But if that is the reality of the situation, by asking ourselves the right questions, how do I get on board with this? What part will I play in this new change and in this new world? That empowers us, as Liggy just said. But it's the internal dialogue, and I believe that so many people don't stop and listen, not to the world around them, but to the voices in their head and the way in which we are speaking to ourselves. That's as I say for me in the shower in the morning. If I say to myself in the shower, oh, it's a gray day, I say, okay, well, that's what it is. However, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
How am I going to change the world around me? What can I do today? And sometimes it's just, I'm going to send out emails. I just need to activate my brain onto one thing that I can control. I may not control all the other destiny that supports that, but I do have a lot more control when I begin to recognize the internal dialogue. Because I believe you have control at some perspective in everything around us.
And interestingly enough on that point, we could all do with having a little chat with ourselves, you know, and really listening to ourselves, because 90% of what we do on autopilot. You know, we do things and we've done them so often, we push them into our subconscious and we're not consciously aware of them. Sometimes we've got to stop and really think about what we're doing. You know, my dad's got a great expression. He says, if you want to go a bit faster, slow down. And I think that, you know, it's quite interesting because very often we're running around and we're doing too many things. But it's also when we're listening to ourselves, we need to listen to the inner child. Because very often we can hear ourselves when something doesn't go our way. The little petulant child inside all of us is going, it's not fair.
Yeah.
But you know what? Life isn't fair, you know? And it is very much about how you respond to those situations. You're a lot more in control sometimes than you actually think you are.
Any other questions?
I've got a question. So, Liggy, you've spoken a lot about tonight around, I think you can hear me, around what we can do for ourselves around resilience. I work in housing. What can I do to support other people to be more resilient with the changes that are happening in terms of welfare reform? So in terms of supporting other people, if you could give any advice around coaching, or what would you
I think in terms of coaching, I think the number one thing to bear in mind with resilience is you can't present to somebody, you know, here you go, here's the magic formula for your resilience. They've got to learn that themselves. So I think it is about, if you like, creating environments where people can talk for a start. You know, I don't think we have enough opportunity, you know, particularly in life as it is, go, 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 to actually stop and do a little bit of self-reflection. You know, I mentioned 90% of what you do habitually. So sometimes you've got to stop and see what you've got in your pot. You know, what kind of dead wood have you collected along the way? So giving people the opportunity, if you like, to take the metaphorical mirror and have a really good look in it. You know, because I think sometimes we're afraid. We want to hear all the good bits, but we don't always want to have a look at the bits that aren't particularly helping us. So creating those environments is really key. And I think in terms of the framework, those 10 strategies, you know, those were based on behaviours from people who'd really dealt with quite an eclectic range of experiences. So I think having a look at that framework and equipping people with the options and the toolkit that they can dip into will probably help.
Okay, any more questions? All right, well, we'll all have an opportunity to chat over drinks and some canapes. So in closing BridgeTalks tonight, I want to thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you.
Brilliant
Thank you,
presentation.
everybody.